Okay, just a quick attendance on my American Public Opinion class. How are we doing?
There's some.
Excellent, excellent. You recognize this guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man of the hour.
That's right. Oops.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Ulrich, and I'm director of NYU Washington, D.C., and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, Election Analysis, 2014 Midterm Elections and What It All Means. Our panelists include political analysts, media experts, campaign insiders, and scholars who will facilitate a thoughtful discussion about the 2014 midterm elections and what lies ahead for the 2016 presidential election. Thank you to our team, and a special thanks to Tom McIntyre and Gabrielle Royale for organizing the program tonight, and we hope that you will join us for reception following this event. For all of our avid social media users in the audience and those watching us via live stream around the world, be sure to stay connected with us, and we'd like to encourage you to use the hashtag, which is on our big screen.
There you go.
I would like now to introduce our moderator for this evening, Patrick Egan, who will then introduce our panelists. Patrick Egan is Associate Professor of Politics and Public Policy at New York University. He specializes in public opinion, political institutions, and their relationship in American politics. He is author of Partisan Priorities, How Issue Ownership Drives and Distorts American Politics, and co-editor of Public Opinion and Constitutional Controversy. In 2012, he received the NYU Golden Dozen Award in recognition for his outstanding contribution to learning in the classroom. Before entering academia, he served as an assistant deputy mayor of policy and planning in the office of Philadelphia Mayor Edward Rendell. He holds a PhD in political science from UC Berkeley, master's degree in public affairs from Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School. Please join me in welcoming Pat Egan.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone, for being here for NYU's Washington, D.C. Center's election analysis in 2014. We really have a fantastic group of people here tonight, and I want to thank you all for being here. I think it's going to be a very engaging and rigorous discussion of the elections that just took place earlier this week. So let me start with some really brief introductions, then we can actually get started. Immediately to my left is Donna Casada, who covers defense, foreign policy, and politics in Congress for the AP, the Associated Press, whose members include 1,400 U.S. daily newspapers and thousands of television and radio broadcasters. She has been a newswoman in AP's Washington Bureau from 1986 through 1994 and 2003 through the present, and served as the AP's national political editor for the 2004, 2006, and 2008 election cycles, but more importantly for us, she also headed out their coverage of the House elections in 2014, so we'll be hearing some details about that soon. Let's see, then to Donna's left is Ana Navarro, who's a Republican strategist.
I suspect I'm to Donna's right, but okay.
I planted that joke, and I'm glad that you picked it up so readily. Sitting in the middle of the panel is Ana Navarro, a Republican strategist who has served as the national co-chair of John McCain's Hispanic Advisory Council and as national Hispanic co-chair for John Huntsman's 2012 campaign. She's a political contributor at CNN and CNN en Espanol, and her experience also includes service as Florida Governor Jeb Bush's Director of Immigration Policy, as ambassador to the UN Human Rights Commission, and providing representation to private and public clients on federal issues, particularly related to immigration, trade, and policy affecting Central America. Certainly to Anna's left is Steve McMahon, who is co-founder of Purple Strategies, a bipartisan consulting firm. He got his start in politics on the Senate and political staff of Senator Ted Kennedy, and has worked on dozens of Senate gubernatorial mayor campaigns across the country. He's also served in senior roles in 3 presidential campaigns and produced the advertising in support of Barack Obama for the Democratic National Committee in 2008. His current work focuses on providing comprehensive reputation, brand image, crisis management, and issue advocacy campaigns to companies and industries operating in challenging environments. His firm also works on a number of initiatives and referenda. Last but not least, we have Rob Collins, who is a veteran Republican strategist who currently serves as executive director of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, where his primary responsibility is and was to elect Republicans to the United States Senate, and it's one that I would say he carried out quite successfully in 2014. Before taking over at the NRSC, Collins was a partner at Purple Strategies, Steve's bipartisan consulting firm, And Rob's career includes a who's who's list of Republican luminaries working with Jeb Bush, Carlos Gutierrez, Eric Cantor, and Chuck Hagel, among others, including work on over 14 election campaigns. And so, again, I'm just very happy to have you all here. As you heard earlier, I have a little bit of Democrat in my background, so I guess we do have a somewhat partisan balanced panel. But I'm going to take off that hat tonight for sure and be rigorous and nonpartisan in analyzing what just happened. And I encourage you all to do the same to make for a more interesting and less kind of scripted conversation. So let me just start with some facts that probably just by fact of the fact that you're either watching this on the internet or you're here in the room with us, you're pretty familiar with. But just to give you some background, on Tuesday, the Republican Party picked up at least 7 Senate seats and probably 9, I bet if Rob's counting, at least 13 House seats and probably more, at least 3 governor's mansions, and won new majorities in 11 state legislative chambers. So that means that the Republican Party now controls the U.S. Senate, the House of Representatives, and both the legislature and the governor's mansion in no fewer than 23 states. So let me start by putting the Democrat on the hot seat and ask Steve McMahon, was this a wave, and why did it happen?
Well, yes, it was a wave.
Okay, because there was some debate about that even among
well,
Democrats. They were trying to push that one off.
I think there was a debate for part of the day.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
But by the end of the evening, even David Axelrod had tweeted that he earlier had said it was not a wave, and later the results proved him wrong.
Okay.
So why did it happen? How did it happen? I mean, if you talk to Rob, who graciously came to our class earlier this week, he would point out that in the 6th year of any presidential term, I think going back almost 100 years, right?
Well, it's 1950.
The average number of seats lost is within this range. Is that
6?
6. Okay. So this is a little bit bigger than the average, but the average is 6. So there was that. There was also the fact that Democrats were defending in 7 states seats that had been in an electorate that Mitt Romney had beaten President Obama. So they kind of started out behind. And then, of course, the president's approval ratings at 40 didn't help at all. That's 40 nationwide. In those 7 states, it was probably in the mid to low 30s, wouldn't you say? So if you look at kind of those 3 things occurring together, it was going to be a tough night for Democrats regardless. And I think the things that Democrats were hoping for, an advantage on turnout, young voters and African American and minority voters participating at 2012 levels instead of 2010 levels, just didn't materialize the way that we had hoped. And these guys did a great job.
So, but you're focusing on the Senate, which I think is the easy answer, right? Because the map was, as anyone could tell you, was a tough map for the Democratic Party this year. But I think what's even more remarkable, not to diminish your remarkable achievement, is that Republicans did so well across the country regardless of how strong the 2 parties were. So they won governorships in Massachusetts and Maryland and Illinois, right?
Yeah.
They took state legislative chambers across the country regardless of how blue or purple or red the state was, right? And so for me, looking at this, I say, the Senate I'm not that surprised about. It's, again, remarkable achievement. So, but what I think is really kind of noteworthy here is just the extent to which there was a partisan sweep of all these other offices. Now, Donna Casada, you've been covering politics for a long time. Where do you put this in the historical perspectives in terms of a partisan wave?
I would put it right up there, in part because the House, which was my responsibility, it looks like Republicans may have 250 seats, which would top the number that even existed when Harry S. Truman was in the White House in 46, that period, 46 to 49. What also struck me, as far as historical perspective, Barack Obama now has the ignominious distinction of being the president with the most midterm losses of any 2-term president. He surpassed Truman for that. It was across the board. Republicans did extraordinarily well, and in real Democratic turf. You look at New York 24, which is the Syracuse area. you have a Democrat, Dan Maffei, who lost by 20 percentage points in a +5 Democratic district. And you elected or New Yorkers elected a Democratic governor, or re-elected a Democratic governor, Andrew Cuomo. There was no energy for that governor's race, and it didn't help for any of the Democrats in that state.
Yeah, no, I think that's sort of my sense too. And I mean, looking back to previous elections like this, can we think of something in recent political memory where one party ran the table on all levels of these offices, not just the federal offices? That's what I'm trying to. I mean, that's what I'm trying to remember. But there's nothing immediately comes to mind.
Well, it actually happens that way more often than not. I mean, you know, there's a reason they say rising tides lift all boats, and they do. And you know, you can also get into the particulars of some of these states where the candidates weren't exactly perhaps the best candidates Democrats could have nominated. Martha Coakley, for instance, had already lost to Scott Brown in an overwhelmingly Democratic state, losing Ted Kennedy's seat, and she lost again. Was anybody surprised by that? Maybe not so much. You know, we could talk a little bit about the campaign here in Maryland that we all got to watch on television, or the campaign in Illinois. You know, Pat Quinn was not exactly a strong Democratic incumbent. I mean, after all, he was primaried by Bill Daley for a period of time until Bill Daley kind of lost patience for it. So he didn't start the race in the best of positions, and he didn't end the race, obviously, in a very good position. But those are kind of, you know, those are to some degree anomalies. What you're talking, and Dan Maffei, you know, is running in a state that's a +5 district. But I think a lot of people would say the same thing about Dan Maffei. So there are individual circumstances that might help to explain it. But broadly speaking, a wave hits everybody. And when a wave hits, get out of the way.
So, Rob, let me ask you, on a night of lots of delights for you, which of those victories was the most pleasant surprise for you?
Most pleasant. I'd say the most pleasant was North Carolina. You know, back beginning of October, the Democrats had outspent us, and they'd leveled $42 million of attack ads against Tom Tillis, and he was still hanging in there. But they had a $7 million spending gap between October and Election Day. And we made a huge gamble. And my good friend Alex Castellanos, I talked to him, and I talked to Haley Barber, and I talked to a bunch of folks, and kind of synthesized all their thoughts. And the committee invested $6 million in there to try and close that hole. The thought being is that the outside groups, from all appearance, looked like they were pretty starved for cash, and we were getting outspent all year, and we were looking at the map and saying, there's no way they'll fill a $7 million hole. They can't go to their donors and say, we need to fill this $7 million hole. It's not 2012, it's not 2010. The money's a lot tighter. So we said, let's fill that hole, get it as high as we can, and hopefully the outside groups can come in and keep piling on. And it worked. And we were able to get Tom Tillis, who's a fabulous candidate, and a senator who will be fun to cover, and who I think will be in the mix of a lot of the action in Congress. So that was really satisfying. Joni Ernst, I mean, first woman elected statewide in Iowa ever, first female combat veteran ever to serve in the U.S. Senate, and a candidate who roared out of a 7-way primary and just never looked back.
She's probably also the first hog castrator, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
In the U.S. Senate.
Certainly the first
I'm thinking
female
about this
hog castrator.
Yeah, I wouldn't make that. But yeah, female will give you female. Though. Yeah, I would say there was probably a few castrators in their day, but she, you know, she went from 0 to, I mean, a candidate who'd never run statewide, was a first-term state senator, to a woman who raised $6 million the last quarter, outraised Senator Mitch McConnell, who is no slouch. I mean, she was our #1 fundraiser online. So to watch her on that podium election night and see her just, you know, just win it, just was great. And then another really satisfying win, I would have to say, is Cory Gardner, because, you know, the Democrats really challenged us, you know, in the press, and they said, oh, you know, remember, let's think back February 2013. We were a broke, old-fashioned, demographically challenged regional party that was never going to see the light of day. And we'll be lucky if we, yeah, sure, you can pick up 6 seats if you win all Republican seats that Romney win, that we have a Democrat. And we went into Iowa, we went into Colorado, we went into New Hampshire, we went to North Carolina and found good candidates. And, you know, some races in Michigan and Oregon didn't close, but, you know, to sit there and say our counterparts weren't, so it's losing sleep over Oregon and Michigan is not true. And they spent millions. They spent $4.5 million in Arkansas. I mean, so we were able to spread them and force them to go into places they didn't want to go. And so a lot of what was most gratifying is the candidates who made it, and they all went through our training seminars in our schools, and you know, we were roundly criticized by our opponents. Oh, our people don't need training. Your gaffe-prone people need training. They're so out of touch with America. You need to tell them how to talk to their voters.
Tell that to Bruce Braley.
Yeah, I mean, and we were glad to take
gaffes,
the punches
yeah.
for our candidates, and they performed really well.
Right.
And, you know,
Yes.
Could I just wanted to ask Rob a question, if it's okay, because
Absolutely.
I had the benefit of hearing him in class the other day, and one of the things I think was so smart about what was done this year over at the committee that was never done previously is they had a plan to kind of deal with the Tea Party. And if you don't mind, Rob, just sharing
Yeah, that'd be
sharing
great.
that for the group, because it was, in my view at least, you know, if you look at what you accomplished in primaries in defeating Tea Party candidates who were insurgents, who would have had trouble winning a general, and what you did to actually get some of them out of primaries so that someone like a Cory Gardner could run, created the moment that you got to
Right.
enjoy the other night.
I mean, I think dealing with the Tea Party, I would phrase it a little differently in that, you know, folks on the outside always wanted to put an ideological label on the committee and said, oh, we're only letting certain people, you have to pass a litmus test to get our support. That was never the case. What it was we put a competency test, and we said, could you win a general election? You know, if you start your campaign by saying America's swimming in a sea of debt, and you filed for bankruptcy in 2010, and you owe the federal government $54,000 and American Express $280,000, you're disqualified. That's just not going to fly. If you lost a case 6 weeks before the primary that you cheated investors in a deal, that's a disqualifier. If you posted photos of gunshot victims on Facebook, that's a disqualifier.
Right.
So I would say, I mean, you know, we never really felt that we were at war with the Tea Party. We were always at war with the for-profit conservatives in D.C., largely DC-based groups, who were largely silent after the primary. They didn't lift a finger to help our folks in a general election. They'll tell you they bundled some money, but I don't think our candidates felt their impact. But in a primary, you know, they forced us to churn a whole bunch of energy and a whole bunch of money to beat these flawed candidates. And they always wanted to make it an ideological battle, and it never was. We never told people what to believe. We just said, do we think you can win? And we didn't just back it up with our feelings. We did research, and we said, we focus grouped it, we polled it, and we found, you know, people don't want to vote for someone who lost their medical license, and they don't want to vote for someone who was convicted of fraud. It's just kind of a natural human reaction. I think that's a bipartisan desire to not have fraudsters in the Senate. So, you know, that was kind of how we dealt with them. But it was a very aggressive plan, which was, especially on the incumbent side, which was, at the end of the day, the NRC, like the DSCC, like the DCCC, is a membership organization. It is created and sustained by members. And part of the mantra, or the part of the operating goal is, we're bringing back our members. And you may not like that, well then go form your own group and support it. And I mean, there's no law against, you know, and people did. And they said, well, we're going to change that dynamic. We're going to change that you know, we're going to change the membership. Our goal was, from Mike Enzi to Thad Cochran to Pat Roberts, that we're bringing back all our incumbents. And when folks challenged that concept, they didn't like it, but we didn't pull any punches, and we went right after anybody who came after our incumbents, and it was largely successful. For the first time since 2008, all of our incumbents came back.
Yeah.
And you know, if we had this storm in Kansas that we saw electorally, and we didn't have an incumbent who for 40 years had been being a darn good senator, and we had a first-time candidate who won through because we just kind of threw our hands up in the primary, we probably would have lost that. And it was 40 years of good work is what brought back Pat Roberts, and it wasn't anything else. And a first-time candidate who hit that storm head on where you had the Republican base really angry at Republicans, probably wouldn't have survived it.
Interesting perspective. Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about the Senate races throughout the evening. Let me just turn to the other side of the coin. So we've been talking a lot about the partisan flavor of this wave, of this change. But what we haven't been talking about is whether this wave is particularly ideological. That is, does it have policy content? So to turn to the other side of the coin, across the country at the ballot box, Americans legalized marijuana, raised the minimum wage, turned back abortion restrictions, and in Washington state enacted background checks on guns despite huge amounts of spending by the NRA and other organizations. So given this, Anna Navarro, what issues make up, to the extent that the Republican Party has a mandate at this point, is it anything than just Obama has been a disappointment and needs to up his game? Or is there some sort of policy component to this wave that can actually turn into real accomplishments in Washington?
You know, I don't think, first of all, I don't think the Republican Party has a mandate, and I don't think we should think of this as a mandate. I think we have to think about this as something to build upon. And it's not by coincidence that all these things happen. We learned after, I was a very frustrated Republican after 2008, after 2012, and I think we learned that primaries do matter, that we can't just sit on the sidelines and let the, folks come out of the primary that are not going to be good general election candidates. We learned that opposition research is very important. We had a group come out, America Rising, who did great work, and a lot of these races were decided, probably Iowa. One of the things that was very, very determinant was Bruce Braley getting caught dissing farmers, which is not a thing you want to do in Iowa. So we did much better on opposition research, I think, as Republicans. The RNC deserves a lot of credit for having put bodies on the ground to help on things like Hispanic turnout. They did a lot of work in places like Colorado. One of the things that was most satisfying for me out of Tuesday, and I was very excited about Joni Ernst and Cory Gardner, but Cory Gardner in particular, Colorado, we shaved at that gap, which has been growing and growing and growing. We chipped away at some of those gender gaps and youth gaps and racial gaps and Hispanic gap. And it's something, there's still a lot of work to be done. It's something to be built on. I think that we have to look at the recruiting that was done and the help that was given to these recruits. The NRCC did a very good job recruiting women to run. We had 10 women. We have, we are making history as a party with women. We've got the youngest woman elected that won out of New York. We've got the two women who for the first time are going to be representing states in the Senate, in Shelley Moore Capito and in Joni Ernst, and it's Republicans making these gains. I was very happy to see that our candidates this time didn't make woman-oriented gaffes, that we happen to have recruited candidates and have candidates who seem to understand the biology of a woman. Think of that. And in fact, we're able to fight back at an overplay by some Democrats on the woman issue. When you have Mark Udall getting referred to as Mark Uterus, he's being, he's overplaying that hand. And our candidates who, a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, were caught like deers in headlights, this time fought back, were prepared, and were effective at chipping away at that gap. So I think there's a lot of things to look at. The candidates themselves did a great job, worked very, very hard. I think Rob's being, very humble. Kansas, part of it was his 40-year career, and yes, the record he's got there and the relationships, but part of it was that when they saw he was running a lackluster campaign, they sent the cavalry in. I just wish, I think now all these folks that got elected, you have got to demand they own houses in their state. I mean, if nothing else, at least a tent, that they can pitch in some, in some, right. I mean, we cannot help anybody who does not own, rent, something, a donor's couch and, a twin bed in their mama's basement does not qualify as a home in their state. So the question about policy, I think it's less about policy and it's more about change. To me, this was a change election. I think the change people want is a functioning Washington. Now, we know that a Washington that was led by Harry Reid in the Senate and John Boehner in the House did not function. The Congress didn't function between itself, and it certainly didn't function with the White House. And I think Mitch McConnell and John Boehner understand that, which is why you saw them quickly put out today an op-ed outlining what their policy priorities are going to be, because people want to see some tangible things. They don't have to be gigantic things, but do something, do anything, put something out there that we can say, wow, look at that, a bill actually passed Congress.
And so let me also throw this to you, Donna. Again, having seen covering the Hill and Washington for a while, what is the Republican Congress's best strategy here in terms of thinking about now and thinking about 2016? So one thing would be to pass a lot of legislation that appeals to the nation that they know that Obama has to veto because of his own base. And that certainly would be one thing, and that's a strategy that's been practiced by both Democrats and Republicans in the past. Another strategy is to sort of say, what can we actually get done? What can we put on the president's desk that he'd actually sign? And I guess if you're looking at what we know from what's worked in the past, which of those paths do you think they're going to pursue?
I think the first 100 days, I would expect to see a lot of the jobs bills that Speaker Boehner and Speaker Boehner talked about today, in fact. Expect the Keystone Pipeline, try to chip away at the healthcare law, the medical device tax repeal. It's probably high on the list because there is bipartisan support for that. I can tell you the one thing they shouldn't do, which is we expect the president to do an executive action on immigration. I think it's going to be incumbent upon Boehner and McConnell to keep their rank and file in check on that. But there are going to be a lot of Republicans in the House who are going to be screaming impeachment over this. Remember, this is the same Republican Party that in the House that voted to file a lawsuit against the president, though they haven't been able to come up with lawyers to execute this. But, that's going to be the ugliest thing out of the box. And, how the Republicans handle that, I think, is going to be very interesting. But, for them, and particularly for McConnell, the idea is to get back to the regular order of having senators voting on amendments and bringing up amendments. And I think that will help the Republican Party and help their senators. I mean, one of the complaints I heard from Democrats on the Hill was that Harry Reid, in trying to protect his vulnerable incumbents, just limited all of the votes, whether it was on amendments and doing the legislative process of filling the tree. So they only had a handful of votes. So Rob was very effective, and his candidates were effective in running ads that said, Mark Udall voted with the president 97% of the time, or Kay Hagan voted with the president 97% of the time, because all they had were nomination votes and just a handful of bipartisan bills. So it'd be great for McConnell to get out there and just let them offer amendments and go all night long.
That's true. And let's actually talk quickly about the House, though, right? So most of the big problems for Republicans in terms of their national image being broadcast from Washington probably originates in the House. So all of these images of Boehner being unable to even get his caucus, control his caucus to vote on something that he was promising that he could deliver. You know who the new Republican members of the House are going to be, this expanded majority. Do they come from the more moderate wing of the party, or are they as conservative as the people they're going to be joining in Washington? Because I think that probably has an impact on what things look like over the next 2 years.
I think it's both.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, in Georgia, you've got some Republicans coming in to replace the Phil Greengrees and others who are very conservative. But at the same time, Boehner was very successful in recruiting sort of country club Chamber of Commerce Republicans. So, one candidate comes to mind, Ryan Costello, who won in the Pennsylvania district that Jim Gerlach has held for a number of years. I could see Ryan Costello being very effective. Elise Stefanik, you were mentioned, New York State. So there's definitely a mix, and Speaker Boehner even mentioned that today. He said, most of my members are solid Republicans.
I think he's going to be in a more comfortable position for two reasons. One is because, yes, he did a very good job in recruiting. When I think about some of these new members coming in, Barbara Comstock, Carlos Curbelo, these are team player, party building Republicans. But also, through the primary process, the ones that aren't team builders and that like to be the skunk in the party literally were weakened through this primary process. Whether they want to admit it or not, whether the Democrats want to admit it or not, the truth of the matter is that the ones that aren't team builders, the Marco Rubios, the Rand Pauls, were much more sought after surrogates all over the country than Ted Cruz was.
That's a good point. And it's also, we're in this amazing moment where Rand Paul, who used to be considered so extreme and kind of untouchable, is now a sought after surrogate for different candidates, et cetera.
So I have a slightly different view.
All right.
Which won't surprise anybody because I'm the Democrat sitting here, right? I think that Mitch McConnell was very smart yesterday to come out and basically say, we're not going to repeal Obamacare. We're not doing that. But at the same time, John Boehner is over in the House planning the 56th vote on repealing Obamacare. Now, I understand they have a different constituency, and they have a different base. And over in the House, you still have the rule that nothing moves forward unless it's supported by a majority of the majority. And the majority of the majority is the same majority of the majority that voted to sue the president and will be screaming about impeachment very soon. So it's going to be interesting to see the difference between, John Boehner's House of Representatives and the caucus he has to manage, which, and by the way, I believe John Boehner is, a principled conservative who's been around Washington for a long time, who's perfectly capable of going to the White House and cutting a deal, and then perfectly willing and perfectly capable of getting his head cut off when he gets back to his caucus and says, here's the deal I just cut. That's what happened on the grand bargain. He couldn't deliver his caucus. And it's going to be interesting to see whether he can going forward. Mitch McConnell, on the other hand, I think is somebody who's actually trying to draw some lines around things right now to basically set expectations that the Senate isn't going to behave like the House of Representatives. The Senate is going to do things differently and differently than Senator Reid did. We're going to let people offer amendments. We're going to have votes. We're not going to do crazy things. And I think the interesting show in town for the next little bit is going to be twofold. Number one, does the president want to be confrontational, or does he want to be like Bill Clinton was and like George Bush was in dealing with an opposition Congress and actually sign some things?
He needs a personality transplant for that.
And actually sign some things that are going to enable him to get some things accomplished. Because after all, he does have a base, but he's free of his base because he's not running for re-election again. Yeah. So you've got what's the president's posture going to be, and then which of these two how is John Boehner going to get his caucus to a place where they can actually do something that the president might be willing to sign, and so that he and Mitch McConnell together can actually demonstrate that the Republicans now, having been given the reins, can actually govern.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, right? Is it, so looking ahead to 2016, is it in the Republicans' interest to govern, or is it in the Republicans' interest to jam things up to make the Democratic president look like a figurehead and then really take the reins in 2016?
Depends which Republican you're talking about. No, seriously, it's like Rand Paul has a different interest than Ted Cruz, who has a different interest than somebody who actually might be able to win a general election like a Jeb Bush. Mm-hmm. And I believe the question is whether or not there's room in the Republican nominating process, not in the Republican Party, because the Republican Party, writ large, is still dominated by the George H.W. Bush kind of Republican. At least that's my view. I'll let Rob check me on that. But the Republican nominating process is dominated by the Ted Cruz type of Republican. So the question becomes, again, it's sort of like Mitch McConnell versus John Boehner's caucus. which of those two factions of the party are going to nominate the candidate that's going to stand for president, because there is still this blue wall. It's got a couple of little bricks that have been taken out in the last couple of days, but there are still 18 states that have gone 6 times in a row for the Democratic nominee for president, and they represent 242 electoral votes. And so the Republicans are in a position to be competitive now, more competitive than they were, last year or 2 years ago. But the turnout model is going to be a little bit different in 2016 than it was a couple days ago.
That's right.
And they're going to have to appeal to the middle, not just the right. And if they nominate the wrong candidate, that's going to be hard to do.
So we're going to open up this to questions from the audience in just a minute, but I don't think we should close the conversation without talking about immigration and immigration reform. So Anna, as it turns out, I was looking at exit polls from the national House races.
I just want to tell you, I want to talk about this like I want to talk about it.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to put people on the spot, but this is going to be obviously a really live issue one way or the other over the next few years. So just a couple of things. One is that it does look like Obama is going to undertake some kind of executive action. We don't know how sweeping it's going to be, but it's certainly one that will be the red flag in the eyes of the bull, as McConnell was putting it the other day. And we're in this environment where, in fact, as I looked at exit polls from the national House races, Democrats actually outperformed how well they did with Hispanics in 2010, in 2014. They improved their numbers among Hispanics, Latinos by about 6 percentage points. So this is an issue that's difficult for both parties.
Where did they improve the numbers?
Nationally. So this is the national exit polls, our best sense of what people across the country thought. And obviously with exceptions of like those you were mentioning. But if you look just nationally, which kind of makes sense, right, where there were no races taking place, the typical Latino Hispanic voter is seeing Republicans block and Democrats dawdling. So not a huge surprise. So I guess the question is, are we going to see anything happen? Walk me through the trajectory here. We assume Obama does something with an executive action over the next 3 to 6 months. What happens next, if anything, and do we have anything that looks like a bill that's on the president's desk before January 20th, 2017?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Okay.
First of all, I think everybody is in a box.
Yeah.
I think everybody wants to do something and wants to address the issue. And when I say everybody, I'm talking about Republican leadership and I'm talking about President Obama. I think, all the principals want to do something, but I think all the principals are in a box. I think President Obama has put himself in a box because he has been making promises to the Hispanic community and to the immigration advocacy community since 2007,
right,
when he was candidate Obama and he promised that he was going to have immigration reform done the first year of his first term. And since then, the Latino community, the immigration advocacy community, that base has been hearing from this White House, well, we've got other priorities, we've got other imperatives, we've got other issues we've got to work on, we've got an economic meltdown, we've got this, Rahm Emanuel doesn't want me to do it, I don't have the political capital, you've got to wait your turn, you've got to wait a little more, well, now we've got elections coming, so you've got to wait a little more, well, I'm going to do it the first year of my second term, well, no, now you've got to wait a little more, and it's been 7 years of waiting. So the community is at a frustration level that I think was reflected in places like Colorado, like Nevada, where Brian Sandoval did a great job with Hispanics, but also Hispanics are frustrated. Even in Georgia, the small number of Hispanics who live there voted much more for Republicans. There is enormous frustration, and I think that they have had it with waiting. I don't know what happens if President Obama doesn't live up to his promise of an executive action. I think Luis Gutierrez chains himself to the White House fence, douses himself with gasoline, and sets himself on fire. And then what do you do? I'm not even sure the White House sends somebody out there to put him out. So, President Obama is in a box. On the other hand, you have got a Republican leadership that hates, and I think a Republican base in a lot of the country that hates governing by fiat. And we have been hearing President Obama say for a long time that this is not a monarchy, that he's not the king, he's not the emperor, he can't do things by himself. Now it turns out that he can. But okay. They are going to have a problem if he does executive action. But also the community is, has absolutely no confidence or trust in Republicans to give them, any time to deliver on an actual bill, because Republicans have had the chance, the House has had the chance to work on a bill, and they weren't able to craft it and cobble it together. So I don't think, I think everybody wants to do something. The principals want to do something. I don't think there's trust between them, and certainly the community doesn't trust anybody. So I think everybody's in a very difficult position. I think there's an opportunity to do something, because I genuinely believe that both Boehner and McConnell and the majority of their members want to address this issue. It won't be what you saw come out of the House and the Senate and the bipartisan immigration bill. It'll be something that can pass the House. But I'm not sure what happens to that opportunity and that disposition if executive action happens, because I think it's going to be just a very volatile move.
All right. Well, with that somewhat gloomy outlook, I want to give our audience a chance to ask questions. If you're interested, why don't you raise your hand, and I'll have you stand up, and you can address that question specifically to somebody on the panel or to the panel generally. Oh, we've got a mic. That's what I'm seeing. Okay, great. Somebody must have a question. Great, in the back.
Hi. Hello? Hi. So I guess I'm sorry you guys didn't have like more than 2 days to think about 2014, but I've read a lot in the past couple of days about 2016, and specifically about whether Hillary Clinton won or lost on Tuesday. And I just was wondering, given everyone's obsession with it, myself included, what any predictions that you have for 2016, and do you think that what happened on Tuesday is going to be like a boon or a curse to her potential campaign that starts up?
Steve thinks she won. Rob and I think she lost.
Yeah, sorry, I want to know.
The quick summary.
I'm not convinced she's running, so I'm not. Still, we'll see.
I wasn't either, but I honestly think she's gotten past the point of no return. If she's not running at this point, she is the biggest political tease in my lifetime, because she has got every Democrat frothing at the mouth at the idea of her running, and the field frozen.
But don't you remember, there was a guy named Mario Cuomo
Oh,
who
hey.
had a similar level of frothing, and Democrats, were standing around waiting for him, and there was a jet on the tarmac waiting to take him to New Hampshire to file in 1992. And his decision not to run created an opportunity for another guy named Bill Clinton, who took the Democrats from darkness into light and created opportunities for us to be successful and moderate and reasonable and win elections. So I actually agree with Rob. I'm not sure she will run. I agree with you that it's been a great sort of tease, if that's what you want to call it. But, I think she's genuinely undecided, and I would not be surprised if she chose a normal life and not committing to 10 more years of contentiousness. And I wouldn't blame her a bit for doing that. And remember, everybody says, how can you not run for president? You're the front runner. You're gonna win. And she's like, well, that's what I was in 2008. And so she understands better than most that, sometimes front runners don't win. And she also understands better than most what a grueling exercise it is. And there's going to be somebody on the left, and they're going to be a gadfly or a gnat, but they're going to make it more difficult than it needs to be, and probably more difficult than it should be, and maybe more difficult than she wants to endure.
Now, as to your specific question, if some of these races had gone the other way on Tuesday, I think everybody would see it as a win for Hillary Clinton. If she had an ally in the governor of Florida, such an important state, where she went and campaigned, that'd be a win. If she had an ally in the senator in Iowa, where she went and campaigned, that would be an important win for her. She obviously, her policies weren't on the ballot. She wasn't on the ballot. This was a repudiation of Obama, not of Hillary Clinton. But whether you want to say whether it was a loss or not, that you can debate. But what it wasn't, it was not a win for Hillary Clinton, certainly.
But if she runs, she'll still be nominated. So, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Whether it was a win or a loss or a tie or whatever it was, she's the overwhelming favorite. If she runs, she'll be nominated. And it will be a difficult general election no matter who the Democratic nominee is.
But you agree that if Alison Grimes, who self-described as a Clinton Democrat, and still probably, maybe today she can remember who she voted for in 2008. But you will agree that if Alison Grimes had won, if Charlie Crist had won, if Bruce Braley, whatever the Democrats want to call him today, had won, it would have been a good night for Hillary Clinton.
Listen, I agree with what you just said a moment ago. It wasn't a repudiation or an embrace of Hillary Clinton. It was more of a repudiation of Barack Obama if it was a repudiation of anybody. And I never, anybody who's in my class knows that I'm one of those people who's of the view that the most likely predictor of any election is what? So I never thought Alison Grimes, I love the fact that she made it close, but I always thought the bottom was going to fall out on her at the end. And in fact, since September, I've been saying to my class, watch this race. Here's what's going to happen. I hate to say it, but I said the same thing about Georgia. As much as I thought Michelle Nunn was a great candidate and I wanted her to win, I just didn't believe it was fool's gold. It's like Republicans in presidential races at the end always think New Jersey's in play, and it's not.
Right. This year it will be, though.
Do we have another question from the audience? How about here on the end of the aisle here?
So sort of piggybacking off of that last question, Maryland stunned a lot of people by going red. Is that a blow that an O'Malley 2016 campaign can survive? What changes you think they would have to make?
Is it a blow? Yes. Can the campaign survive? Yes. Because the campaign it's just a little thing over here right now. And it's not even a campaign. It's just Martin O'Malley running around the country building up his name ID. So it will become a campaign when there are debates, if Hillary agrees to debate him, or it won't become a campaign. But it's not going to have much to do, I don't think, with the governor's race. I mean, you could argue that Maryland was a repudiation of O'Malley, or you could argue a lot of different ways. But the fact is, it wasn't a very strong Democratic campaign, and it wasn't a very dynamic or charismatic Democratic candidate. And there was a wave out there, and he was not able to kind of surf it.
The good news for O'Malley is that nobody outside of Maryland and the D.C. area knows who the hell he is. So really, I mean, if I go down my street in Coral Gables, Florida, I can assure you they think it's an Irish pub.
As an Irishman, I think I resent that slur. Donna, you had a point you were going to make.
I had a question for Rob. I know that in conversations about a year and a half ago, you were talking about Ken Buck in Colorado as your likely candidate nominee, and you weren't planning to spend any money there. Tell me how everything transpired with Cory Gardner getting Ken Buck to run for the House seat. What was the backstory?
Yeah, I don't think we never came to a decision we were going to spend money there. We looked, like I said earlier, everyone always wants to put an ideological label on party committees and the establishment and say that we pick people because they're pro this or anti that. And we looked at the race, and we had Owen Hill, who I hope continues to be in elected politics, and Amy, I'm blanking on her name, but she's a state senator there, Amy, I'm forgetting right now.
It'll come to you tomorrow.
Yeah. And they're both young, new Republican type people in Colorado in the Cory Gardner mold. And Ken Buck, who had lost by a couple points. It was a good Republican year, but he still lost, and had said some things that were pretty incendiary in the primary and then also in the general. But we also looked at things as a political reality and said, he could be our nominee. So, for instance, when we had candidate training, we invited all of them. And, 2 of them came out. And but Ken and our committee had good relationship, where in 2010 they weren't speaking to each other. We were always honest with them, And he started running some commercials on the internet with some women who he'd impacted when he was district attorney, helped him out through some, I believe it was sexual or domestic violence, who came on camera and said, Ken Buck. And we were talking about how do we soften Ken Buck? How do we make him more? And then there was this guy we kept talking to, and our political director, Ward Baker, was good friends with him, and he never ever said no, but he never said yes. Those of you in college would understand this phenomenon at bars when you never quite get a no, but you don't quite get the yes. So you keep asking. And then Cory Gardner got very serious and said, I want to really take a hard look at this. This was post-shutdown. This was Obamacare failure. This was springtime, and things were rumbling. Colorado had just had a few recall elections. The Hickenlooper's numbers were really soft. So we helped him on getting smart about, does he have a path? But he did it all. He went, and he and now Congressman Buck are good friends, and they spoke in 2010, and they went to dinner, and they worked it out, and it was remarkable. And I wish I could pretend I'm this puppet master and our team orchestrated this whole thing, but Cory Gardner ran the best campaign in America, and the start of it was just like the end of it, really well thought out, really well executed. And he didn't have to threaten. He didn't say, I'll do something bad. He just said, I think I have a shot to win, and why don't you run for my House seat, and we can both win. And that was kind of his, kind of pitch to the voters of Colorado. Let's all win here. Let's do something different. And it was, he's a remarkable candidate. I mean, he got 5 out of the 6 major newspapers in Colorado to endorse him. Denver Post, first time in 20 years they endorsed a Republican. And he sustained some of the most vicious and brutal war on women attacks that we've ever seen. The last ad that they put up against Cory Gardner was filmed in an OBGYN's office. I mean, they were so on that one issue. And as I said today, Colorado had 5.1, very low unemployment. They never spoke about it. They had there's a lot of great news coming out of Colorado. They never spoke about it. And when the president comes in, they don't want to be seen with him, and it's, so they presented us an opportunity. I mean, when the debate moderator, using her words, not mine, calls Democrat Senator Mark Udall Senator Uterus, you've pushed too far into one direction and you've lost your audience. And we in a totally honest way, we've done this before. 2006, there were times in campaigns that we ran that we got so fixated on how to win that we lost a sense of reality. But also, I don't want to put it all on Udall. I want to say Cory Gardner ran a campaign that I think will be studied heavily in the next couple of years as just remarkable.
We've got time for one quick question, and then we're going to wrap up. Is there anything more that we can hear from the audience? Great.
Hello. My question is for Ms. Navarro. I remember last year with the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the DACA program that Obama or his administration came out with. I remember every House Republican came out against it. So is the reason Obama's been dragging his feet on immigration, is that because of the House Republicans? And also, as your work is in outreach, what are the different the spectrum of opinions on the DACA program?
Okay, well, I think, let me do the DACA thing first. I think there's a majority support for DREAM Act kids on both sides of the aisle. And a lot of times, honestly, objects aren't as crazy as they appear on TV. Because in the media industry, they like to have sparring going on. They think it makes good ratings. So when it comes to an immigration issue, they'll have somebody who's pro-immigration, and then they'll call in, instead of calling in Mario Diaz-Balart, they'll call in Steve King. If it's a gay marriage issue, instead of calling in Ileana Ross-Leighton from Florida, who's pro-gay marriage, they'll call in
Steve King.
Rick Santorum.
Steve King,
Right,
right?
so, to draw that contrast. So if you're looking at the media, you probably don't realize it, but I think that in the Republican caucus and certainly in the Democrat caucus, there is wide support for the DREAM Act kids. There is an issue with the executive action, with the way it was done. I mean, I don't know any legislature anywhere that likes it when the other branch of government, when the executive does things unilaterally and supplants them through executive action, whether it's Democrat or Republican. It's just something that one branch doesn't like when the other branch does. So that's, that's on that part. And what was your second question?
Like, what are the range of opinions on that? Is it like...
I think people don't like executive action. I think most people like the policy. I mean, some don't, right? And there's always going to be a group that doesn't. But I think most people would support the idea of DREAM Act kids. I think that's a particularly appealing piece that has wide bipartisan support. But I think people have a real issue with executive action.
Just to follow up on that point, 68% of Americans are opposed to executive action. When asked the question, should the president act to come up with his own solution on immigration, or should he work with Congress? 68% of the American people say work with Congress. 63% of Hispanic households say work with Congress. Candidly, the only demographic that was for it was the under 25 demographic. So probably an appropriate room that we're talking about this. But it cut across bipartisan lines, age lines, gender lines, racial lines. And if the president does this, he may please a small sliver of his base, but he's going to anger a lot of folks. And I think he will undo any potential chance to get something done real in his presidency, which would be a shame.
Well, with that, and it sounds like immigration will continue to be a live issue over the next couple of years, I'm going to close their discussion tonight. I want to thank Donna Casada, Rob Collins, Steve McMahon, and Anna Navarro for being with us tonight. Let's have a round of applause of thanks and gratitude. And we've got a reception somewhere in the building. I'm still getting to know what the building is like here, but we've got a reception, so please join us for refreshments afterward. Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, guys.